Hello, welcome to this video. And on this video today, I have a guest with me. I have the socialist historian Matthew Herbert. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
It's actually Michael.
Michael, sorry, I've completely read it as Michael Herbert. So that's a great start, isn't it? Anyway, we'll leave that in. Michael Herbert, of course. Sorry.
It's
Um,
kind of waltz on all Zoom contest to broadcast folks.
yeah, exactly. And we've already said hello and done all of that anyway. So I'm just doing a bit of YouTube pretense there. But we shall go into it. So Michael is runs is it it's Red Flag Walks, isn't it? Which is a series of education, really, courses on
Yes,
radical history.
the kind of
Uh,
generic term. I used to do walks around Manchester
right.
um, before leaving work, and then after retirement, I did a lot more. That's kind of dwindled off. Now, mostly I do sort of online. Well, it's gone online since the pandemic, really.
Hmm.
So history of radical women, particularly, is one of my strong subjects, and also working class history in general. So I've been doing that quite a few years, and but also venturing into looking at, as we're going to talk about today, science fiction, which is another long-term love of mine, going back to the early '60s.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, you contacted me and said that you'd be happy to come on the channel and talk about this. So it's a real boost. So thanks for coming on. You tell me a little bit just about your background as well, because obviously you used to you worked did you worked in universities, higher education before you did online, or did this is just something of your
Yeah, mostly worked in lots of a number of different jobs, both private sector, but for the last sort of 20 years or so, I was in the public sector in Manchester Council, and took early
right?
retirement in 2011, which is a long time ago now.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
they and
It
but I was
is.
able to pursue in more depth some of my historical interest in working class history. And
Yeah,
it's kind of through that interest in working class history, I was involved in the Working Class Movement Library in Salford, which I recommend to people. And they have an amazing collection in one building, dating back to the late 18th century, the year of Thomas Paine, the year of
yeah.
Peterloo, and so on. But
Lovely.
I
I mean,
came across
yeah, I've
I
never,
came across a pamphlet one day.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying I've never been there. It's just somewhere I would always really wanted to
Mm.
visit. It's a bit of a way up from here down in Dorset, but yeah, I should imagine it's
I see.
an amazing repository. Yes, so just and tell me how you got into that interest really with working class history, because it's one of mine, and
But you're in a good
sorry,
you're in a good place for that because of the association with the Toll Puddle
Toll
Martyrs,
Puddle.
obviously.
Yeah,
That's on
absolutely. Yeah.
Dorchester. And there's still an annual Trade Union Toll Puddle Festival, I think, which I went to a few
Yes,
years
that's
ago,
right.
a month. So I came across a pamphlet when I was looking through some of the library stuff by Malcolm Hulke, and he was involved in the 1950s. We'll talk about his involvement with the Communist Party maybe as well, but it's also involved with the Unity Theatre, which was founded in 1936, I think, as a kind of left-wing socialist theatre involving not professional actors, but people who wanted to sort of perform plays that had some political content, yeah, and also involved writers. Ted Willis was involved for a time, and quite a few other number of well-known actors worked there for a time. So it was very creative. So Malcolm was involved in the 50s, and in the late 50s, he wrote a guide to Unity Theatre,
Right.
explaining what the theatre was about for new people. So, because often people join something and then weren't quite sure how it
Yes.
started or what the history was or what all these assistant ASM meant and things like that. So I sort of knew Malcolm's name from Doctor Who, being a long-term fan from 1963. So I kind of used the pamphlet as a starting point and sort of tried to explore a bit about him. And I'd heard he was in the Communist Party. So I was able to write a pamphlet published about 2015, I think, by Five Leaves Press in Nottingham. But I
Yeah.
sort of was able to look at this Doctor Who work, but I didn't find out a great deal about his time in the Communist Party, so that seemed quite hard to access. I tried various archives,
Yeah, but
um, couldn't find anything.
yeah, no,
But then the fact
yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it? I've taught on Communist Party history, and it's yeah, it's slightly it's impenetrable to get into something. I mean, I understand he left and then in 51 and then rejoined and was there until sometime
That's
in the
right.
60s, and that's all we really know about it. So before, but obviously we were talking prior to pressing record. And I'd done some work on Sam Ronovich and the American Threat to British Culture conference that he did in
Oh yeah.
1951 in London. So it's just something that intrigued me. Obviously, as we go into the later 50s, and you think of the left that was critical of mainstream entertainment, Americanized entertainment, television, whatever. So I'm particularly thinking of Richard Hogarth and the uses of literacy and whatever. It's just I've just
Mm.
it's an odd. There's a paradox how that squares being a member of the Communist Party and then writing scripts stuff for Doctor Who, but obviously he's come in. I don't know what you think, if that sort of wave of bringing stuff to the masses, and within that you can put your point across as well. Do you think there's a bit of that in there?
I think there was different approaches. I think the sort of communist, as you said, the Communist Party often regarded American culture as sort of corrupting, as sort of pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist. But at the
Mm,
same time, young people in Britain embraced American culture, with rock and roll and the films. And so there's a kind of sort of diversion between the sort of kind of culture that people like Jimmy Miller, Ewan McCall kind of want to
yeah,
recover, the folk tradition, which was very
hmm,
popular. But also at
very.
the same time, running alongside that, you've got young people inspired to start up skiffle groups, and that progresses into, beat music in the early 60s with the Beatles
Yeah.
and everybody else. So in terms of Malcolm, he's working at Unity Theatre, and that's going to kind of be very creative and not a
Yes.
subject to sort of fairly dour interpretations of culture that Sam Aronovich and the others. So there's sort of different approaches. I think Malcolm found the Communist Party quite repressive, I think, and kind of constricting, and
Well, and I
Unity Theatre
suppose
far more
those.
in.
Yeah. I suppose some of those characters, Aronovich and so forth, were apart from the autodidact tradition that always engaged more with what they considered to be the more loftier, higher ends of culture. And I always think of the embrace of culture from the left in the late 50s, more coming from the new left from Stuart Hall and that. But this is an interesting character that that that
Mm.
that sort of
Yes,
goes
I think they're
against
much more
my.
open. They're much more open.
Yeah, I think it was, and well, certainly Hall was. I don't. Raymond Williams or whatever, maybe, and E.P. Thompson, perhaps less so to a degree. But this is interesting, and it's interesting you mentioned that Malcolm might have found the Communist Party a tad restrictive in its.
Yeah, and also the big disparity between the ideals and the people who practiced it, who did
Yes.
so. He kind of left the party, but then clamoured to rejoin, which he succeeded. Because I think when he was moved back to London, a lot of all his contacts and friends were in the party still, I think. So he
Hmm.
kind of persuaded them to join against their will almost. But and he lived in a house in Hampstead, owned by Betty Tate, who was in the party, and Malcolm
Right.
lodged there for many years. And when I was writing the book, well, two things really sort of helped it move forward was getting hold of Malcolm's MI5 Special Branch file, which mysteriously had been sort of put into the National Archives. So
Right.
this was very useful because lots of all his letters were copied, and phone calls that he made to the Communist Party had been recorded and transcribed. So there was a great deal of
Fascinating.
information there, which filled in a lot of gaps. Also came across some things he'd written himself. Did he talk to the BBC about his early life? How his mother was a single parent, how they were always meant to escape creditors.
Right.
So
And
he,
yeah,
so he
didn't
never
he
really
write?
went to school.
Yeah, didn't he write in the? And there was something. There's a piece in the Observer about that where he did that later on. So I read
Yeah,
somewhere in the 70s. Yeah, it's
that's right.
it's
Yeah. So yeah, he kind of
yeah.
discovered that the man he'd always been told was his father wasn't. So he discovered this after his mother's death. So,
Oh, I see.
so
Yeah.
it was, in some sense, it was kind of very much an outsider. In a sense, he'd never been to school, when he applied for a passport, discovered his birth hadn't been registered. So he had to apply to sort of get himself sort of admitted as a British citizen. So it was in the film If that he decided he was working in advertising, and he met up with Eric Pace, and they sort of worked together to try and get into television. So this is the new thing, with
Yeah,
the arrival of mass television from 53 onwards, really, and then the arrival of independent television. So
yeah,
suddenly there's a demand for writers. And although their first thing was in 1958 for the BBC, their first play, which had Patrick McGowan in, by the way, and Billy Holiday. Billy, um, they was mostly for the ITV that they were working on things like armchair theatre, and then they did
yes,
Pathfinders in Space in the early 60s, which in some sense you could see the kind of almost like a prequel to Doctor Who. Creator. It
yeah.
was like Sidney Newman, who was producing Armchair Theatre, wanted this science fiction series to sort of involve and excite young people about space and exploration and science.
Yeah, which was obviously a massive thing. That was really where we were going towards at the time. And that becomes, particularly in the 60s. I mean, I always think of, first thing I think back is to the Wilson, the white heat of technology sort of speech. That was
Yeah.
that was what was going on, at least on the surface of this stuff. But there is an engagement and an interest with all of this as well, and it leads through, doesn't it? I was looking into him in the 70s. He wrote he wrote the screenplay for the Green Death, the Pertwee Doctor Who one around the environmental stuff.
Um, yeah, no, he didn't actually write the Green Death.
He
People often
didn't,
he did the Target.
right,
No, he did the Target novelization of the Green Death, but he didn't actually
right.
write it himself. So but in the sort of 70s, Target Books started producing novels based on Doctor Who. And to begin with, they were written by Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke.
Right.
And so Malcolm was able to write quite a few novels based on his own work, but not just a kind of straightforward, recounting of it as it appears on TV. They often added in new characters or created backstories for characters, or
This
sort of
is
his aim, as he said, was to kind of create well-rounded stories. So they often differ to a certain extent from the TV version.
okay. That's interesting. I've never read any of them, and I presume they're very good. They work as well, because you always just think Doctor Who as a visual medium, not something that you actually read. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one.
But it was the only way that people had of kind of revisiting old Doctor Who because there was no repeats. So there was no, in the 70s, there was no video. So the Target books
Ah,
proved very popular amongst fans of the show who wanted to, who'd miss some of these early stories, for instance.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so that's why if you go on eBay, you can still find most of them reasonably cheaply because they were produced in very large numbers. And and the kind of the TV tie-in novel was a big thing. You can get one
Yes.
like I don't know on the buses or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because you had the annuals every year as well, which were the big sort of Christmas present thing, wasn't it? But yeah, that's interesting that there's
Yes,
the
that's
numbers
true. Yes,
that go alongside it, I suppose it.
and
This,
Malcolm won the Avengers in the early '60s, the kind of Honor Blackman era of the Avengers, the Kathy
yes,
Gale era. Wrote quite a few um, of those, so that was a kind of new kind of sort of new kind of serial, I suppose, new kind of series. It was kind of adventure, but often with a kind of surrealist twist,
yeah. No, I,
and a good deal of fight.
yeah, and it makes you also just thinking about that now with the tie-ins, and that, not the stuff being everywhere, how far away we are from those days as well, how far it's come. What do you think he would make just of the modern day, of the contemporary Doctor Who? It's obviously
Oh, I couldn't possibly answer. I
no,
know what I
no,
think about it, but I couldn't really answer what he would think about it. He kind of, wrote the reason why we're able to sort of know something about him was that the sort of the fan world, the fanzines of Doctor Who developed in the late 70s, mid 70s, early 70s. So you get young men, they all seem to be men, creating fanzines around Doctor Who, and they kind of track him down and go and interview him. So we have got a number of interviews with Malcolm. Died in the late 70s, which was again great. great source of information for my book. And I was able to speak to some of the people who'd done as young men, they gone to see him, so they're still around. Gary Hopkins, for instance, who went to become a writer, he was kind of inspired by meeting Malcolm in 1979, just before Malcolm died. And Gary went on to write for the Sherlock Holmes series with Jeremy Brett that was on in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, so one of my
So
favourites there.
I
I
think
really like that.
in terms of music, obviously this is a music channel to a certain
Oh,
extent. And obviously,
it is.
I
It's
think one of the
becoming that way.
striking
Yes.
things about Doctor Who, I think one of the things about Doctor Who was the sort of striking, difference of the format, but also the music they introduced. It was quite different to anything on TV at the time. It's kind of it sort of sounded very different, and the series looked very different.
Yes. Yeah. But we're getting a bit. Sorry, we're getting a bit of delayed. Just where I'm sat here, so it's just difficult to just trying to go back into real time now. Just in terms of thinking about the music and just referring back to Malcolm there. I mean, you didn't see too many musicians or acts that were particularly involved with the Communist Party or sort of followed any of that stuff. I mean, I can think of Robert Wyatt and think of Matching Mo earlier
Yes, it
on,
probably was.
and Henry Cow,
Mm.
but the majority of that stuff sort of deviates a little bit from there. Obviously, I'm not sure how many people. I
Mm.
mean, I wrote about when I was doing my masters and Jagger turning up in Grosvenor Square and getting featured in Tariq Ali's Black Dwarf and
Oh
some of the
yeah.
letters. Some of the letters are hilarious because they put the words to Street Fighting Man alongside something by Engels, and the juxtaposition of that was enough to throw. Uh,
I thought that
what was it?
song was
Uh, yeah, sincere. I think one of the letters that the guy concluded by saying it makes sincere socialists want to vomit. So, as I said, I always had always was sort of very aware when I was studying the underground press how some of this stuff didn't really go together. But as you said, there's a loosening, and so perhaps you could talk about the times when you were around and what you were interested in and the bands and that sort of journey.
well, I suppose that's when I started listening to sort of pop and rock around about 1968, 69, really. So my first big single I bought was "Oh Well" by Fleetwood Mac, and first record was "Let It Bleed" by the Stones. So I was
Wow.
heavily into that kind of rock, not rock era, and then progressive rock. Yes, Pink Floyd,
Yeah.
Gentle Giant, and yeah,
This is all
and,
yeah, very
then
much up
punk came.
my alley. Yeah, yeah.
Then
Tell me
punk
about
came
punk.
along in Manchester.
Yeah.
So that's so in Manchester. I was living in Manchester, so that was a sort of epicenter of punk, really, in '77. So I used to go to a place called the Electric Circus in North Manchester, where all the bands were passed through. The Ramones, Clash, Brazillos, Warsaw became Joy Division, many other bands, and so I kind of stayed with punk for a couple of years, and then suddenly it was new wave, XTC. I say I was talking about
Mm.
XTC with a young person, a young man this week. It's one of his favourite bands. I was amazed he'd heard of them, but sorry.
Wow, that's
10cc,
something.
very clever.
Yeah.
And then kind of like the 80s. And then I suppose then we started listening to a lot of world music and jazz. So we just listen to anything now, from Miles Davis to Shostakovich.
Yeah, it's funny as I was talking about this with a YouTuber the other week, how everything's gone from very much people very much their whole identity invested in music and what they listen to, and the bands has been just particularly in the 70s or and in the punk era and the 80s as well. What you listened to and what you carried around was your identity, and that seems
Mm,
to have completely died away. Identity seems to have gone to something else now, and music just doesn't have that. So this is this huge since the 90s sort of eclecticism in in what people listen
Mm.
to, I suppose, and they're just not as invested in that way as we once were, you know.
I think it was, but it seems to be very interesting looking back. I mean, listening to John Peel going out buying the latest single at Virgin Records,
Mm.
obscure band from the Midlands. And then you might go and see them the following week on their tour. So, I mean, you had to kind of work to listen to music. You had to look just to John Peel. You had to track down the records, and you had to kind of go out and watch the bands. So
Yeah,
now it's all available all the time, everywhere, and it sort of seems like a background rather than something that's intensely involving.
well, you've got
Maybe I'm just an
also,
old fogey.
yeah, no, well, me too. I suppose we've gone away from hi-fi stereo and everything working towards that. Everyone, and it's, as you said, it's all accessible. Everyone can listen it on their phone. And when I used to teach students, they used to. It all seemed that the whole thing was just relative, really. That all of these things just fitted together in the past somewhere, and there was no demarcation between any of it or any of this stuff. It was all just
Mm.
there. It was what was in the past, and they didn't quite grasp it. But then within it, as you were saying about the chap that liked XTC, I'd have someone come up to me and really be interested in Pink Floyd or stuff from way back then. You think, okay, so some of them are doing their work, but it doesn't sort of exist in that world anymore. It's just old fogies on me online constantly putting stuff about old records up, I suppose.
Also, it's kind of wrapped up along with teenage subculture. So if you were like in a, like Two Tone was very influential in the sort of
Mm.
late 70s, early 80s, and there was a sort of way of dressing and listening to Two Tone. You had the skinheads listening to reggae in the late 60s, and then you had the sort of, you might call the kind of long haired sort of bands of the early 70s, like Family,
Yeah,
and things and so on. So Rory Gallagher. So and the sort of subcultures and music mutated quite quickly.
yes,
So you could start off with the Who in the sort of Stones in the 1970, 71, and by the end of the decade, you've gone through to punk and you're about to get new wave and two tone and all stuff, plus
well,
and
that's
disco, and also
yeah, it's
soul music running along.
well, yeah, and that's what's interesting, isn't it? When I was teaching stuff on the '60s, and said, but basically from '62 onwards, every year is a massive leap forward. It goes so quickly. I mean,
Mm,
you're thinking of the Beatles' first record in '62, and 10 years later, what was being made then. It just goes so quick. If you look back 10 years hence, nothing's really changed at all. It was just so it was an incredible time. And going back to the Doctor Who, and that within television as well, as in the speed and that things were moving
mm.
in within that. So it's incredibly, I suppose, fertile and endlessly interesting era, really. But with all that's there and all that can
By the
still
way,
be discovered.
that's I suppose that's quite a lot of freedom, I think, in TV in its early years, anyway. So it's like if the people producing it were given a sort of more or less a free hand to get the series out without much supervision from above, provided wasn't a blank screen, as Terence Dick says, and you were more or less left alone. Whereas nowadays there's a vast bureaucracy, I think, which has stifled a lot of creativity
Yeah,
in television. Actually, one of
yeah,
the things is the sort of the sheer lack of interest on contemporary. We've got vast amounts of channels, and yet hardly any interesting arts provision or music provision. So we've watched a lot of old art programs, Monitor and the Culture Show and Arena and things like that.
yeah.
And
But the
actually,
Late Show we used to get
we
in the
watched an Arena.
'90s,
Yeah, exactly. So
which you
and
just
there's
don't.
nothing
Yeah.
like that.
No, and to
So
really revisit, yeah, revisit anything that's got it is halfway intelligent. You've got BBC4, but it's all archived. There doesn't seem to be any of that stuff coming out now that has any of
no,
the same level. And maybe it's that TV is on the slide as you get streaming and Netflix and the internet and YouTube and all of these sort of things, and people can go towards
I
that
think a lot
communal
of it.
experience.
Yes, I think so. It seems like they're giving up. Maybe I don't know.
it does to a certain degree, and I did see the advert that they did of the BBC the other night, and I just thought they could have been better if they'd invoked some of their really good past glories, like Life on Earth and Alistair Cook and
Mm,
all of that, all the great sort of Orford series, instead of just playing up the entertainment sort of shallow end of it. And I
yes.
don't think, they've got the competition in that already, and it's don't know. I
Mm,
feel like it's they sort of know in a way, and it's a terrible shame, but there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of invention. You don't, we're not unlikely to get another Doctor Who, are we?
I'm not sure we're gonna get any more Doctor Who.
Or something of that caliber
We'll
being
see.
invented these days. It's something of the
Oh,
of the
so
past.
something that was quite different. Yeah. I mean, in the sort of yeah, there's yeah, like the take the Avengers, which started off as a series which ran for about one series, I think, and uh, and then they had to kind of abandon it and they wanted to create a new series,
Mm.
and so I think I spoke to the producer Richard Bates, who's still alive. I think they kind of reduced the first series of the Avengers in 6 weeks. They just said, "Well, we're going to do
It's
it. Get some get some writers, get some actors, and we'll schedule it in." So can't imagine anything that happening that quick now on TV.
No, it's incredible. It really is that level, that speed, and that sort of, yeah. Now it would the amount of, I suppose, with post production, all of the stuff that they gets put into it, you just don't, and the levels that people expect, because it is all about the optics rather than what's going on, and we're taking any leap of faith
Mm.
over that, is it really? But it's where we are, and I don't particularly see a change. But the great thing is, we have all of this stuff from the past that we can still go back and revisit. It's all
Yeah,
there. Even easier these days with the internet and as well.
we're
So
just doomed to repeat our youth on a kind of endless loop here, are we?
it does feel that way, and I'm part of that as well, and I often wish that it was different, but it's as I said, it's not quite the same as it once was. So that's
Mm.
where we end up.
I think the way that people experience TV, the fact that in the early days it was on and that was it. So if you missed it, it was gone.
Yes.
So whether we watched TV much more intensely, and that's why we can remember it more clearly. Whereas in the era where it's endlessly available, repeats, half the time people aren't watching, they're on their phones or
Yeah, I
reading or
know.
something like that.
It's really strange after all the years of what people put into visuals and stuff with, recording with audio and production, that everyone ends up watching it on a tiny little device like that, doesn't it? I don't know. It's getting quite depressing now. I didn't want to go this way, but it's interesting to have that sort of conversation and come to some similar sort of conclusions. Anyway, we're coming towards the end of our half hour. Um, I've enjoyed this today. That's been really good to have that conversation. We'll get this out there and see how we go. And so obviously the link to the book on Malcolm Holt I can put down in the comments, and the red flag stuff. So if you're interested in Michael's work and looking at this further, I shall put that all out there. As I said, down below, somewhere in the comments, it will be there. And thank you very much for coming on today. I won't take too much more of your time. Cheers, Michael, and been
And
good to
thanks,
talk to you.
thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you very much, and perhaps we could do something another time as well. That would be absolutely great. All right.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Just got us.